welcome back to the Velvet Underworld channels. And after this video, I would really like to know your thoughts about these stories. Feel free to share it under the comment sections and where you come from so that we could connect to each other better through this channel. Thank you.
The freezing Chicago rain was violently lashing against the diner windows when a 5-year-old girl in a frayed pink sweater crashed into the legs of the city's most feared Mafia boss. Tears streamed down her pale cheeks as she pointed a trembling finger toward the dark hallway. "They're hurting my mama," she sobbed. What Vincenzo Marchesi did next defied every rule of the underworld. Jennifer Bennett wiped down the cracked formica counter of the Brass Lantern Diner for the 4th time that hour, her muscles screaming in protest. It was 9:45 p.m. on a miserable Tuesday in Chicago's South Side, and the diner smelled of stale fryer grease, bitter coffee, and bleach. Jennifer, 26 and carrying the weight of the world on her slender shoulders, was exhausted to her very bones. In the corner booth, safely tucked away from the drafty entrance, sat her entire world, her 5-year-old daughter, Lily. Lily was quietly coloring in a worn-out book, her little legs swinging back and forth. She was a painfully perceptive child, one who had learned too early how to read the tension in her mother's spine. Jennifer's nightmare hadn't started in this diner. It started 2 years ago when her husband, Thomas, suffered a fatal heart attack. What Thomas hadn't told Jennifer before he died was that his accounting business was a front, and his gambling addiction had left him deeply in the hole to a ruthless local loan shark named Jimmy Gallagher. The debt was $50,000, a mountain of money Jennifer, earning minimum wage plus tips, could never hope to climb. Yet, Jimmy expected his weekly tribute, and his patience had evaporated. The bell above the diner door jingled violently, cutting through the low hum of the refrigerator. Jennifer's heart plummeted into her stomach. Stepping through the door, shaking the rain off his leather jacket like a wet dog, was Jimmy Gallagher. Behind him loomed his shadow, a massive, thick-necked enforcer named Marcus. Jimmy wasn't a polished criminal. He was jagged edges, cheap cologne, and volatile anger. He locked eyes with Jennifer immediately, a greasy smile stretching across his face. "Evening, Jennifer," Jimmy rasped, strolling up to the counter and tapping his knuckles against the surface. "You're looking a little pale. Working too hard?" Jennifer instinctively glanced toward booth 4. Lily had stopped coloring, her wide blue eyes fixed on the men. "Jimmy," Jennifer kept her voice low, a desperate whisper. "I told you on the phone. I need until Friday. The owner does payroll on Friday. I'll have the 600 for you then, I swear." Jimmy's smile vanished. "Friday? Jennifer, sweetheart, we had a deal for Tuesday. Today is Tuesday. Do I look like a bank to you? Do I look like I grant extensions?" "Please," Jennifer begged, her hands trembling as she held the damp rag. "We've had a slow week. I barely made enough in tips to keep the heat on at home. Just 3 days." Marcus stepped forward, his bulk blocking the diner's harsh overhead lights. "Boss doesn't like waiting, Jennifer. Let's have a private chat," Jimmy said softly, his eyes darting around the mostly empty diner. There were only 2 other patrons, an elderly man snoring over his newspaper, and a man in a dark, impeccably tailored suit sitting in the far shadows of booth 9, sipping black coffee. Jimmy ignored them. Before Jennifer could protest, Jimmy reached across the counter, his rough hand clamping down on her wrist like a vice. He yanked her hard, pulling her off balance and dragging her toward the swinging doors of the back kitchen. "Mama!" Lily cried out from her booth, dropping her crayons. "Stay there, Lily! I'll be right back, baby, I promise!" Jennifer yelled back, trying to mask her rising panic as Marcus shoved her violently through the double doors. The back hallway, which housed the walk-in freezer and the employee lockers, was dimly lit and soundproofed by the heavy hum of the cooling units. The moment the doors swung shut, Jimmy slammed Jennifer back against a row of metal lockers. The impact knocked the wind out of her. "You think you can play games with me?" Jimmy hissed, pressing his forearm against her collarbone, pinning her. "Your deadbeat husband owed me. Now you owe me. You don't get to ask for Friday." "I don't have it." Jennifer choked out, tears of pain and fear welling in her eyes. "You can kill me, Jimmy, but you still won't get the money because I don't have it." Marcus chuckled darkly. "We ain't gonna kill you, Jennifer, but maybe we take it out in trade, or maybe we take collateral. That kid of yours out there is mighty cute." The blood in Jennifer's veins turned to ice. A primal, maternal fury surged through her. She thrashed wildly, kicking out and scratching at Jimmy's face. "Don't you ever look at my daughter? Don't you touch her!" Jimmy growled, backhanding her across the cheek. The sharp crack echoed in the narrow hallway. Jennifer slumped against the lockers, her lips split and bleeding, her vision swimming. "Hold her up, Marcus," Jimmy sneered, cracking his knuckles. "Let's teach the widow some respect." Out in the main dining area, the sound of the slap and Jennifer's muffled cry bled through the heavy swinging doors. In booth 4, Lily trembled. She knew those men. They had come to their apartment before, making her mother cry, but this time they were hurting her right now. Pure, unadulterated terror gave way to a child's desperate bravery. Lily scrambled out of the booth, her little sneakers squeaking against the linoleum. She ran toward the kitchen, but the swinging doors were too heavy for her to push open. Desperate, she spun around, looking for help. The elderly man was deaf to the world, but the man in booth 9, the man in the dark suit, was watching her. Vincenzo Marchesi was not a man who intervened in the petty squabbles of street-level thugs. As the head of the Marchesi crime family, he dealt in millions, in political favors, in shipping ports and international logistics. He came to the Brass Lantern once a month for one reason. It was the exact booth where his father used to take him for cherry pie 30 years ago. It was a ritual of quiet reflection. Vincenzo was 34, with sharp, aristocratic Italian features, eyes the color of flint, and a presence that demanded absolute submission. His bodyguard, Leo, stood silently by the front door, looking like a carved granite statue. Vincenzo had watched the thugs drag the waitress to the back. He had recognized Jimmy Gallagher immediately, a bottom-feeding loan shark who operated on the fringes of Marchesi territory. Vincenzo had felt a flicker of distaste, but it wasn't his business. Until the little girl in the frayed pink sweater came running toward him. Lily didn't care that Vincenzo's suit cost more than her mother would make in 5 years. She didn't care about the terrifying coldness in his eyes. She saw an adult, and she needed a hero. She threw herself against his legs, her tiny hands grabbing handfuls of his expensive wool trousers. "Please," Lily sobbed, looking up at him with wide, tear-drenched eyes. "Please, mister. They're hurting my mama. They took her back there." Vincenzo froze. He looked down at the child. Her face was streaked with tears, her lower lip trembling uncontrollably. She was gripping him so tightly her knuckles were white. For a man who had built an empire on ruthlessness, the sheer, unfiltered innocence of the child's plea struck an unfamiliar chord deep within his chest. It bypassed his armor entirely. Leo, the bodyguard, immediately stepped forward from the door, his hand reaching inside his jacket. "Boss, want me to clear her out?" Vincenzo held up a single, gloved finger. Leo stopped dead in his tracks. Vincenzo slowly set his ceramic coffee cup down on the table. He looked toward the swinging kitchen doors. He could hear the faint, muffled sound of a woman crying out in pain. The distaste he had felt earlier curdled into a sudden, dark rage. There were rules in this city. His rules. You don't beat working mothers in the back of a diner while their children watch. "Stay here, Piccola," Vincenzo said. His voice was a low, smooth baritone, surprisingly gentle as he reached down and carefully detached Lily's hands from his trousers. "I will bring your mama back." Vincenzo stood up. He was a towering 6'3", his broad shoulders moving with the fluid grace of an apex predator. He didn't run. He walked toward the kitchen doors with terrifying, deliberate slowness. Leo fell into step 3 paces behind him. In the back hallway, Marcus had Jennifer pinned by the arms while Jimmy raised his fist for another blow. "You're gonna learn, Jennifer," Jimmy spat. "You're gonna learn who owns you." The heavy swinging doors burst open, hitting the walls with a deafening crack. Jimmy and Marcus jumped, spinning around. Vincenzo Marchesi stood in the doorway. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. The ambient temperature in the hallway seemed to plummet by 20 degrees. Jimmy's face drained of all color. The arrogant swagger evaporated in a microsecond, replaced by abject, trembling terror. Every street thug in Chicago knew the face of the Don. They knew the stories of what happened to men who crossed him, stories of bodies found in oil drums, of men who simply ceased to exist. Mr. Marchesi, Jimmy stuttered, his knees literally shaking. He instantly took 3 steps back from Jennifer, as if she had caught fire. Marcus, realizing who he was looking at, immediately dropped Jennifer's arms and raised his hands in surrender. Jennifer slid down the metal lockers, gasping for air, clutching her ribs. Her lip was bleeding freely down her chin. She looked up, dazed, at the devastatingly handsome man in the suit who had just brought 2 violent thugs to their knees with nothing but his presence. Vincenzo stepped into the hallway. He pulled a pristine white silk handkerchief from his breast pocket and, without taking his eyes off Jimmy, crouched down next to Jennifer. He gently pressed the silk to her bleeding lip. Jennifer flinched, but his touch was surprisingly light. "Are you severely injured?" Vincenzo asked her quietly. "No," Jennifer whispered, mesmerized by his flint-gray eyes. "My daughter. She is safe," Vincenzo assured her. He stood back up, his attention turning back to Jimmy Gallagher. We were just handling some private business. Don Marchesi," Jimmy stammered, sweating profusely despite the cold hallway. "She owes me a debt. It's legitimate, I swear." Vincenzo slowly walked toward Jimmy. The silence in the hallway was agonizing. When he was mere inches from the loan shark, Vincenzo finally spoke, his voice dangerously soft. "You do not conduct your filthy business in my city in this manner, Gallagher. You do not touch women. You do not leave children crying in dining rooms. It lacks class. It lacks discipline. I understand, sir. I'll leave right now," Jimmy squeaked, trying to inch toward the back exit. "You will," Vincenzo agreed smoothly. "But first, you will forgive her debt. Entirely. As of this exact second, Jennifer Bennett owes you nothing. Say it." Jimmy blinked. "But it's 50 grand, sir." Behind Vincenzo, Leo simply cleared his throat. The sound of a heavy gun shifting against a leather holster was audible. Jimmy swallowed hard. "The debt is forgiven. She owes me nothing." "Excellent," Vincenzo said. "Now, if I ever see your face in this neighborhood again, or if this woman so much as trips over a crack in the sidewalk and skins her knee, I will hold you personally responsible. And Jimmy, I am not a forgiving man. Now get out of my sight." Jimmy and Marcus didn't hesitate. They shoved their way out the heavy steel back door, sprinting out into the freezing rain, abandoning their car just to get away faster. The back hallway fell silent, save for Jennifer's ragged breathing. She looked up at the Mafia boss, realizing her nightmare with Jimmy was over, but a terrifying new reality was dawning. Vincenzo Marchesi turned back to her, offering a large, strong hand to help her up. "Why did you do that?" Jennifer whispered as she let him pull her to her feet, her legs trembling. Vincenzo looked deeply into her tired, beautiful eyes, remembering the fierce grip of the little girl out front. "Because your daughter asked nicely," he replied. "Now, let us go clean you up. We have much to discuss." The rain had turned to a relentless sleet by the time Vincenzo's armored black SUV pulled away from the Brass Lantern Diner. Inside the spacious, leather-scented cabin, the contrast between Jennifer's world and Vincenzo's was stark. Jennifer sat huddled in the corner, holding a sleeping Lily tightly against her chest. A fresh bandage, applied by Vincenzo's silent, remarkably gentle driver, covered the cut on her lip. Vincenzo sat opposite them, watching the city lights blur past the tinted windows. He had done the unthinkable. He had brought a civilian into his inner circle. "Mr. Marchesi," Jennifer began, her voice hoarse but steady. "I don't understand. Why are you taking us with you? You already handled Jimmy. We could have just gone home to our apartment." Vincenzo's flint-gray eyes shifted to her. "Because Jimmy Gallagher is a bottom feeder, Jennifer, but he kicks up to a much larger fish, a man named Dominic Thorne." Thorne is a lieutenant in a rival syndicate, and he does not take kindly to his revenue streams being severed, especially by me. If you went back to your apartment tonight, Thorne's men would be waiting. They would use you to send a message. Jennifer tightened her grip on Lily, her heart hammering against her ribs. She had escaped a $50,000 debt only to land in the middle of a Mafia turf war. So, what? We're your prisoners? You are my guests, Vincenzo corrected softly. I do not rescue people only to let them be slaughtered hours later. It is bad for my conscience. They arrived at the Marchesi estate, a sprawling, heavily guarded mansion in the affluent suburb of Lake Forest. Wrought iron gates swung open to reveal a world of manicured lawns, classical fountains, and security cameras. Inside, the house was a fortress of marble and mahogany. For the next 2 weeks, Jennifer and Lily lived in a guest wing that was larger than any apartment Jennifer had ever rented. Lily, resilient as only a 5-year-old can be, quickly adapted. She spent her days playing in the gardens, completely enamored with Leo, the towering bodyguard who had inexplicably become her personal protector and playmate, teaching her how to skip stones in the estate's pond. Jennifer, however, was suffocating under the weight of her helplessness. She cornered Vincenzo late one evening in his vast, dimly lit study. He was poring over shipping manifests, a glass of amber scotch resting on the mahogany desk. "I can't stay here forever," Jennifer stated, standing in the doorway. She wore a simple gray sweater, but to Vincenzo, she looked more regal than any of the socialites he usually entertained. Vincenzo set his pen down. "You are unhappy here?" "I am unemployed and hiding behind a Mafia don," she countered, crossing her arms. "I appreciate what you've done, but I am not a charity case. I need to work. I need to provide for my daughter." Vincenzo leaned back, studying her. The firelight caught the sharp planes of his face. He admired her fire. Most people withered in his presence. Jennifer challenged him. "My family owns several legitimate businesses. Fine dining establishments, real estate firms, logistics companies. I need a manager for L'Aurora, a restaurant in the Gold Coast. It requires a fierce intellect, a sharp eye for detail, and someone who knows the reality of the service industry. The salary is 6 figures. Jennifer blinked, stunned. "You're offering me a job?" "I am offering you a career," Vincenzo said smoothly. "And security. You will live in a penthouse owned by my holding company. It has biometric security and private elevator access. You will work, you will earn your keep, and you will be safe." "And what do you get out of this?" Jennifer asked, her eyes narrowing with suspicion. Vincenzo stood up, walking slowly around the desk until he was inches from her. The scent of his expensive cologne, sandalwood, and bergamot wrapped around her. "I get the satisfaction of knowing that the little girl who ruined my perfectly good suit trousers will grow up with a mother who isn't crying in the back of a diner." He paused, his voice dropping an octave. "And perhaps I get the privilege of your company from time to time." The sudden, intense vulnerability in his eyes took Jennifer's breath away. In that moment, he wasn't the ruthless head of the Marchesi family. He was a man who had spent too long in the dark, reaching out toward the light she and her daughter had unexpectedly brought into his life. 6 months later, Jennifer's life was unrecognizable. She was thriving as the manager of L'Aurora, transforming the restaurant into the most exclusive dining experience in Chicago. Lily was enrolled in a prestigious private academy. And Jennifer's relationship with Vincenzo had deepened into something profound, a quiet, fiercely protective romance built on late-night conversations and stolen moments away from the eyes of the underworld. But the underworld has a long memory. Dominic Thorne had been waiting. He knew Vincenzo had claimed the waitress and the child. To Thorne, they weren't people. They were the only visible chink in the impenetrable armor of Vincenzo Marchesi. It happened on a crisp Tuesday afternoon. Jennifer was at the restaurant when her phone rang. It was Leo, who was supposed to be picking Lily up from school. "Jennifer?" Leo's voice was uncharacteristically tight, the sound of screeching tires echoing in the background. "There's been an incident. 3 SUVs ambushed us outside the academy. They took Lily." The world tilted on its axis. Jennifer's blood turned to ice. "No, no, Leo, tell me you have her." "I took out 4 of them, but they boxed my vehicle in. Leo growled, sounding utterly devastated. The boss is already mobilizing. Stay at the restaurant. We are bringing her back, Jennifer. I swear it on my life. Jennifer didn't wait. She ran out of the restaurant, hailing a cab and giving the driver the address to Vincenzo's central operations hub, a massive, fortified warehouse in the West Loop. When she burst through the heavy steel doors, the room was a hive of lethal activity. Heavily armed men were loading weapons, shouting into encrypted phones, and pulling up city surveillance grids. In the center of it all stood Vincenzo. He was no longer the gentle man who brought Jennifer coffee in the mornings. He was a terrifying force of nature, radiating a cold, murderous intent that made the air heavy. "Vincenzo!" Jennifer screamed, pushing past two guards. He turned, and the absolute rage in his eyes softened for a fraction of a second when he saw her. He strode over, gripping her shoulders. "I told Leo to keep you at the restaurant." "She's my daughter! Where is she?" Jennifer sobbed, grabbing his lapels. "Thorn has her," Vincenzo said, his voice a low, lethal rasp. "He wants to trade her life for the South Side Port Territory. He sent a location, an abandoned shipyard." "Give it to him," Jennifer pleaded, tears streaming down her face. "Give him whatever he wants." "I will give him hell," Vincenzo promised, pressing a fierce kiss to her forehead. "You stay here. If I do not return, my lawyer has instructions. You and Lily will be taken care of for the rest of your lives." "Vincenzo, please come back to me," she whispered, realizing in that terrifying moment how deeply she had fallen in love with him. "Always," he swore. The raid on the shipyard was a masterclass in tactical violence. Vincenzo didn't just send his men, he led them. When they breached the rusted doors of the main warehouse, Dominic Thorne was standing on a catwalk, a terrified, crying Lily held by one of his thugs. "Marchesi!" Thorne shouted over the sound of the rain pounding on the tin roof. "Sign the papers, and the brat goes free!" Vincenzo didn't negotiate. He gave a single nod. Leo, positioned on a rafter above, fired a suppressed sniper rifle. The thug holding Lily dropped instantly. Before Thorne could react, Vincenzo and his men swarmed the catwalk. It was over in less than 90 seconds. Vincenzo personally disarmed Thorne, leaving him for his enforcers to handle according to the old laws of the syndicate. Vincenzo dropped his weapon and ran to Lily, who was huddled in the corner. "Lily! Piccola, are you hurt?" Lily looked up, her face tear-stained, and launched herself into Vincenzo's arms. "You came," she sobbed into his shoulder. "I will always come," Vincenzo whispered, holding the child tightly against his chest, shielding her eyes from the carnage around them. When Vincenzo walked back into the West Loop warehouse carrying Lily, Jennifer collapsed to her knees in relief. She gathered her daughter into her arms, weeping uncontrollably. Vincenzo stood over them, bruised, his expensive suit ruined, his hands stained with the blood of his enemies. He felt a sudden pang of guilt, wondering if the violence of his world had finally tainted them. He began to step back, to give them space, but Jennifer reached out and grabbed his hand. She looked up at him, her eyes fierce and full of an unwavering love. She didn't see a monster. She saw the man who had kept his promise. "We go home now," Jennifer said softly, pulling him down so she could press her lips to his. "All three of us." In the end, Vincenzo Marchesi realized the greatest empire he could ever build wasn't made of territory or fear, but of the family he chose to protect. Jennifer rose from a terrified waitress to the formidable queen of his legitimate empire, while Lily grew up knowing she was fiercely loved. A single, desperate plea in a diner had rewritten the rules of the underworld, proving that even in the darkest shadows, love and redemption could bloom.